Warning: this is a disturbing video that may trigger some. Viewer discretion is advised. The first thing Latricia Chance saw when she walked up to the apartment that October morning was a toddler, alone and shoeless, eating cereal on the doorstep. It was her friend Arlena Lindley's 3-year-old son, Titches. Chance said hello. Titches, his mouth full of food, said nothing. Inside, she greeted Lindley and her boyfriend, Alonzo Turner. Chance knew the couple had gone through trouble in the past, and something seemed off between them now. It just wasn't clear what. Then Turner stepped outside and dragged Titches into the living room. Titches had soiled his light blue pajama pants. Turner, a 6'2", 220-pound factory worker, ordered the toddler to bend over and touch his toes. He whipped him with a thick leather belt, then threw him against the wall. Titches hit his head so hard that he spat out some of his breakfast. Turner took Titches by his neck and wiped his face in the half-eaten cereal. With Titches on his back and crying, Turner pressed his foot to the boy's chest. Then he picked him up, dragged him to the bathroom, pushed his face into the toilet, and flushed. Turner turned to Lindley, warning her that if she tried to take Titches out of the house, he would kill her. Chance could see the terror on Lindley's face. Yet Lindley spotted an opening, grabbed hold of her son, and made for the front door. She was too slow. Turner snatched the boy from her arms and, still holding the boy, slammed the door shut on Lindley and Chance, locking them outside. Stunned, they withdrew to figure out what to do. By the end of the day, Titches would be dead, and Turner would be arrested for his murder. Prosecutors would charge Turner with assaulting Lindley too, noting that she was very afraid of him. Yet they would also deem Lindley a criminal. Even though Lindley had tried to rescue her son, they would prosecute her for failing to protect him from Turner. Her sentence: 45 years in prison. Lindley's case exposes what many battered women's advocates say is a grotesque injustice. As is common in families terrorized by a violent man, there were 2 victims in the Lindley Turner home, mother and child. Both Lindley and Titches had suffered beatings for months. But in all but a handful of states, laws allow for one of the victims, the battered mother, to be treated as a perpetrator, guilty not of committing abuse herself but of failing to protect her children from her violent partner, said Stephanie Avalon, resource specialist for the federally funded Battered Women's Justice Project. It's the ultimate blaming of the victim. No one knows how many women have suffered a fate like Lindley's, but looking back over the past decade, BuzzFeed News identified 28 mothers in 11 states sentenced to at least 10 years in prison for failing to prevent their partners from harming their children. In every one of these cases, there was evidence the mother herself had been battered by the man. Almost half, 13 mothers, were given 20 years or more. In one case, the mother was given a life sentence for failing to protect her son, just like the man who murdered the infant boy. In another, the sentences were effectively the same: the killer got life, and the mother got 75 years, of which she must serve at least 63 years and 9 months. In yet another, the mother got a longer sentence than the man who raped her son. In one more, a father fractured an infant girl's toe, femur, and 7 ribs and was sentenced to 2 years. For failing to intervene, the mother got 30. At least 29 states have laws that explicitly criminalize parents' failure to protect their children from abuse. In Texas, where Lindley lives, the crime is known as injury to a child by omission. In other states, it goes by permitting child abuse or enabling child abuse. In addition, prosecutors in at least 19 states can use other, more general laws against criminal negligence in the care of a child, or placing a child in a dangerous situation. These laws make parents responsible for what they did not do. Typically, people cannot be prosecuted for failing to thwart a murder; they had to have actually helped carry it out. But child abuse is an exception, and the logic behind these laws is simple: parents and caregivers bear a solemn duty to protect their children. If a violent partner threatened her child, I would sacrifice my life 10 times out of 10, said Carmen White, the Dallas prosecutor and mother, who pressed charges against Lindley. The law provides justice for child victims, she said, and it sends a message to mothers about their duties. Only a few states provide an exception for parents who feared for their safety at the time the violence occurred. In some of these states, that exception is narrow or limited, leaving battered women open to prosecution. Prosecutors often use the violence a mother endured as evidence against her. Since she was battered, they sometimes argue she should have left the relationship, taking herself and her child to safety. Advocates have tried but failed to compile national figures on how many women get prosecuted and sentenced under these laws. BuzzFeed News created its tally by focusing on 29 states that allow for sentences of at least 10 years. But because of limitations in the data provided by different states, BuzzFeed News' tally is conservative. The actual number of cases is likely higher. Then there are cases of women sentenced to a decade or more, but where it's difficult to determine whether they were victims of partner violence. BuzzFeed News found 45 such cases over the last decade. Often, the abuser and the mother who didn't stop the abuse pled guilty, leaving little detail in their court files about what actually happened. Domestic violence advocates suspect many of these women were battered too, saying that women who've suffered abuse often conceal it, even through weeks or months of counseling. "I know in my heart that there's more out there," said Laurel Mohan, executive director at the Battered Women's Legal Advocacy Project in Minnesota. Where there is evidence of the women being battered, the case files describe them being punched, throttled, kicked, whipped, or raped, often in combination, at or around the time their assailants were doing the same to their children. "My husband took full possession of me and my life," a mother in Tennessee told the court right before her 15-year sentence was handed down. Domestic violence advocates say these cases signal a deep misunderstanding of what it means for women to be trapped in abusive relationships. Many such women fear alerting authorities, because doing so can provoke their partners to extreme violence. Moreover, authorities often fail to protect battered women and their children. Advocates also say that imprisoning these women serves little purpose and deprives any surviving children of their mother. The laws against failing to prevent child abuse are written to cover both fathers and mothers. And, in fact, women perpetrate 34% of serious or fatal cases of physical abuse of children, according to the latest congressionally mandated National Study of Child Abuse. But interviews and BuzzFeed News analysis of cases show that fathers rarely face prosecution for failing to stop their partners from harming their children. Overwhelmingly, women bear the weight of these laws. BuzzFeed News found a total of 73 cases of mothers who, regardless of whether they were battered, were sentenced to 10 years or more. For fathers, BuzzFeed News found only 4 cases. White, Lindley's prosecutor, couldn't recall prosecuting any fathers for failure to protect from physical abuse. "Mothers are held to a very different standard," said Chris McDaniel-Mixio, a law professor at the University of Denver whose expertise is domestic violence. She said that the lopsided application of these laws reflects deeply ingrained social norms that women should sacrifice themselves for their children. From a different perspective, White agreed, saying that severe punishments generally fit what people believe should happen to mothers who shirk their duty to their children. Aside from conceptions of motherhood, McDaniel-Mixio said that many people, and, by extension, many judges and juries, still don't grasp the answer to a question at the core of so many of these cases: why didn't she leave him? Shortly before Alonzo Turner and Arlena Lindley began dating, a young woman named Michaelyn Haynes and her sister were sleeping, they told police, when they awoke to a noise and found Turner in the kitchen. He and Haynes had dated, and he told her he was there to get money he had given her several months earlier. He shoved Haynes. She fell against her sister, who was pregnant. Turner then grabbed a pair of shoes and a cell phone and left. When police officers arrived, they found a ladder up to the kitchen window, which had been pried open. Turner was charged with burglary. About 3 weeks later, Turner again climbed through Haynes' kitchen window, she told police. This time, he ordered her to come outside and speak with him. When she refused, he grabbed her by the neck and cupped her mouth with his hand, forcing her out of the house. A neighbor, Mark Page, overheard the ensuing struggle and demanded that he let her go. He told police that Turner replied, "Stay the fuck back or I'll kill her." Page pulled a Taurus .38 special revolver and fired a warning shot into the ground. But Turner still did not back down, continuing instead to threaten to kill Haynes. Page didn't want to shoot, so he pulled out a knife and stabbed Turner in the leg. Only then did Turner flee. In an interview, Haynes said that even now, with Turner safely behind bars and their relationship long over, she has trouble trusting people. "I'm still scared to this day," she said. Police records first refer to Turner's actions as aggravated kidnapping, a felony. Ultimately, however, he was charged with unlawful restraint, a misdemeanor. The police report states that the incident was not a family violence issue. Both the burglary and unlawful restraint charges took months to wind their separate ways through the system. 2 weeks before he killed Titches, Turner was found guilty of burglary and sentenced to probation. He never stood trial for the unlawful restraint charge, which prosecutors dropped once he pled guilty to murder. Turner declined to be interviewed for this story. He and Lindley started dating in early 2006, when he was 18 and she was 20. "He seemed sweet," Lindley said in an interview. Sitting in the prison cafeteria, supervised by a guard, she recounted the course of their 8-month relationship, which is also covered in court documents. Early on, he took her to restaurants and the local go-kart track, and he bought toy cars for Titches. When he found out that Lindley's ex had called her, he demanded that she tell him that she never again wanted to speak to him. But he didn't hit her for the first few months they were together. By the time they were both arrested, however, he had punched her, pulled her hair, and sat on her. "He choked me all the time," she said, once so hard that he lifted her off the ground. Turner weighed 50 pounds more than Lindley, who is 5 feet 4 inches and wears glasses. One time she tried to call the police on him, but he grabbed hold of her by the hair and hurled her outside. "He would say he would never hit me in the face, because he got a look at me," Lindley said, but anything else seemed in bounds. Turner didn't even care if other people saw. He once shoved her down at a parking lot outside a laundromat, the gravel stinging her palms as she broke her fall. Another time, they were in the apartment, and Turner had some friends over. Turner owned a gun, and Lindley was nervous about it being in the home with Titches around, so she took out a bullet and threw it outside into the dark. Turner found out and ordered her to comb the grass until she found it. One of his friends offered her a flashlight, but Turner refused to let her use it. When she failed to find it, he ordered her to strip naked and continue searching on her hands and knees. Lindley grew more and more afraid of Turner. "He just snaps," she said in court. "You never know how he is going to be when he wakes up in the morning." One evening, after he used a belt on Titches, Turner fell asleep. Lindley quickly packed her bags and got ready to usher Titches out the door. Turner's young nephew was in the home, though, and asked where they were going. She told him they were going to the store. He asked to come with her, but she said no and set off walking in the direction of a friend's place. They hadn't gotten more than a few hundred feet when Turner caught up to her. He forced Titches from her arms, gave him to the nephew, and, clutching Lindley by the shirt, pulled her back toward the apartment. "I done tried to leave plenty of times," she testified, "but he actually called and threatened to kill my family." The last time Lindley tried to escape, she hitchhiked to the home of a friend, who then gave her a ride to her father's house. She didn't hear from Turner for a couple of days. Then he called her cell phone, saying that if she was truly leaving him, he wanted back some stuff he had given her. He came by her father's house, and she brought down a boombox he had bought her. As she turned to go back inside, he grabbed hold of her, threw her into the car trunk, and slammed it shut. "Today is the day I die," Lindley recalled thinking. She lay in the darkness, waiting for his next move. After a few minutes, he popped the trunk back open, telling her, "I ain't gonna do you like that." Lindley was terrified. "But," she said, she also didn't want to bring trouble into her father's house. She moved back in with Turner. Texas lawmakers didn't seem to have cases like Lindley's in mind when, in 1977, they created the state's child abuse by omission law. During a brief committee hearing, just one witness was called, a county prosecutor. Asked what kinds of situations the omission law would cover, he cited parents who failed to feed their children, causing them to starve. He did not mention a woman failing to stop her violent partner from abusing the child. The bill passed easily. Yet prosecutors used the law against battered women as early as 1983, when an El Paso man named Keith Webb murdered his 6-year-old stepson and buried him in the desert. It emerged that Keith had also been abusing his wife June for years. She had reported him to the police several times, but he was never prosecuted. June was convicted of child abuse by omission because, on 2 occasions after Keith hurt her son, including when he dropped the baby in scalding hot bathwater before his death, she didn't seek medical help for the boy. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Other states' laws arose in different circumstances and at different times, but many came as part of a general trend, starting in the 1960s, toward stricter child abuse statutes. Domestic violence advocates began to organize on a national scale in the late 1970s. When lawmakers in Minnesota and Iowa created failure to protect laws in the mid-1980s, they added specific defenses for parents who reasonably feared they would be harmed if they stepped in to stop child abuse. In the early 90s, Texas also added such a defense to its omission statute, but it was a narrow one. It would not apply if the parent were aware of any child abuse prior to the incident in question, a sharp contrast to Iowa, which extends its defense to parents aware of continuing abuse. Even as understanding of domestic violence grew, and as prosecutors built up a track record of using omission laws, some legislators still didn't envision battered women being prosecuted under such laws. In 2000, Oklahoma State Representative Yari Askins authored a bill that created the crime of enabling child abuse, with the word enabling meant to drive home that a failure to act was enough to warrant prosecution. In an interview, Askins said that she has paid keen attention to domestic abuse against women throughout her career, going back to when she was a judge in the 1980s, when there was no specific crime for assaulting a spouse or partner. As a legislator, she helped pass a law stiffening penalties for committing a domestic assault in front of children. But during the creation of the Enabling Child Abuse law, the prospect that it might help imprison battered women wasn't on the radar, Askins said. We weren't thinking about domestic violence. Askins said she is sympathetic to mothers in those situations, and she thinks it's an important mitigating circumstance. But she doesn't think protections need to be built into the law. She made a point that White, Lindley's prosecutor, also made. Defense lawyers can raise that sort of evidence in court, and judges and juries can consider it as they weigh guilt or innocence and decide on punishment. But often, it's prosecutors who deploy the fact that the woman was battered. Some point to failed attempts to leave the abusive partner as proof that the mother wasn't completely helpless and could have done more to save her child. Others cite contact with police or social service workers about domestic violence prior to the child's injury as missed opportunities to disclose more about the danger posed to the child. Many, in one way or another, present the man's violence as a testament to the mother's poor decision-making. In his opening statement in the trial of an Oklahoma mother accused of enabling child abuse, the prosecutor told the court that the man had also abused the mother. But, the prosecutor said, she made the decision to stay. He added, it's about putting your child at risk because of the choices you make, and the choices you make to stay in an abusive relationship. Whatever Askins and her fellow lawmakers intended, Oklahoma prosecutors have used the law vigorously. Of the states BuzzFeed News examined, Oklahoma had the most women imprisoned for a decade or more, 20 overall, including 4 cases in which BuzzFeed News found evidence that the imprisoned mother had been battered. In Ohio, with 3 times the population, BuzzFeed News found a total of just 3 cases. In fact, the likelihood that a woman will get a severe sentence depends largely on where she lives. In Minnesota, the maximum sentence for permitting child abuse is 1 year. In Oklahoma, the sentence can be life. And then, even within a state, it is individual prosecutors who decide whether to press charges and how aggressively to do so. In one of the only cases that ever captured the national spotlight, prosecutors actually changed their minds. 27 years ago, 6-year-old Lisa Steinberg was found comatose with brutal injuries in a fetid Manhattan apartment. Her mother, a 45-year-old children's book author named Hedda Nussbaum, initially faced murder charges alongside her husband, attorney Joel Steinberg, who would eventually be found guilty of manslaughter. But it quickly emerged that Steinberg had battered both wife and daughter. At the time of her arrest, Nussbaum had a broken nose, fractured ribs, and a potentially life-threatening ulcer. Prosecutors dropped the murder charge against her. But whether Nussbaum deserved to go to prison became the subject of fierce national debate in the press, especially after she admitted at Steinberg's trial that both of them used cocaine heavily, and that she had an 11-hour window between Lisa's final beating and her death yet did not call the police. In the end, prosecutors did not charge her with endangering the welfare of a child, a misdemeanor in New York with a maximum penalty of 1 year in prison. In Oklahoma, enabling child abuse carries the same sentence as actually committing it. Askin said that when her law passed, her only focus was protecting society's most defenseless. Many issues have shades of gray, she said, but child abuse is not one of them. I'll protect the child at all costs. With the door slammed shut and Titches trapped inside with Turner, Chance and Lindley drove off to find a payphone. Chance wanted Lindley to call 911. But Lindley worried that might set Turner off further, putting Titches in more danger. She was so scared of him, Chance said. Lindley later testified that her top priority was to calm her boyfriend down. Then, with the situation under control, she and Titches could escape when he left for work. So instead of calling 911, Lindley called Turner, eventually negotiating a return to the apartment a few hours later. What Lindley and Chance did not know is that while they were gone, Turner had more in store for Titches. The apartment manager, who had seen Lindley and Chance leave, could still hear Turner yelling, so she peered through a window into the apartment. She saw Titches on the floor. Turner kicked him in the stomach, repeatedly. By the time Lindley and Chance came back to the apartment, Turner seemed to have calmed down, somewhat. Titches was dressed in fresh clothes, with a Band-Aid on his temple. Turner had bought some Pepto-Bismol, saying Titches' stomach was hurting. But Turner began forcing the tired child to walk from the dining room table to the television, back and forth, again and again. Lindley begged him to let Titches lie down for a nap, and finally he relented. He then ordered Lindley to go to the grocery store. Not wanting to reignite his fury, she agreed. Chance drove her. They stopped by a beauty supply store and a grocery store, and Chance dropped her back home. Lindley put the shopping bags on the counter and checked on her son. His eyes were wide open, and he was turning back and forth on his bed, agitated. Then he stopped breathing. When the paramedics arrived, Turner ordered Lindley not to ride in the ambulance with her son. Eventually, a police officer drove her to the hospital. Titches was dead. A Dallas police detective walked Lindley, still crying, to an empty room and handed her a sheet of paper to write out what happened. Later, Lindley made a fuller statement to a different officer. The apartment manager gave her account too. Turner was arrested that evening and charged with capital murder. The police report noted no priors for family violence. Prosecutors added a domestic assault charge for hitting Lindley when she tried to stop him from beating Titches and for shoving her to the ground. Lindley said that as she went about mourning her son, she had no inkling that she was a suspect herself. She had made both statements to the detectives voluntarily and hadn't been Mirandized. She continued cooperating with the police too, passing along Turner's .22 caliber pistol, which she found in a shoebox as she cleaned out her apartment. 5 days after Titch's death, one of the detectives who had taken Lindley's statement appeared at her door with a warrant for her arrest. He told her that when Turner was beating Titches, she should have called 911. By not doing so, she had failed to protect her son. She faced up to life in prison, but would only receive 45 years. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.